Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kate Mosse, and it's my enormous pleasure to do one of my last pre-performance talk after the show, because there's already been a post-performance talk with the cast. But we have done a pre-performance talk for every show this season, and as you all know, it's the 50th anniversary season of our very beloved CFT, and it's sort of bittersweet in a way to sit here in the shadow of the building works beginning. But we are incredibly grateful to Toby for agreeing to do this, just right at the end of the run when you must be completely exhausted. But this is the 12th of the interviews that I've done, and we've had more than 2,000 people have come to the pre-performance talks this year, which has been absolutely wonderful. There have been 65, give or take, additional events. All of them are supposed to give the audience and all of us who love this theatre just a little bit of extra information about all of the plays that have been on in the main house, in the Minerva, and of course Theatre on the Fly, which was up and is now gone. So there's now brown grass there instead. The theatre, when it was opening, as you know, in 1962, July 1962, was described as the impossible theatre and then the miracle theatre. And it seems absolutely wonderful to everybody involved in CFT over the past 50 years, some of us slightly more recently, that we should be ending this 50th anniversary season with one of the most successful, most well-reviewed, zillions of stars all over the place, production of Private Lives, which, of course, Toby is starring in. Yeah. So, Toby, hello. Yes, I thought I'd give you a chance to have a glass of water while I rabbited on. One of the things that's been, I think, so exciting about this particular production of Private Lives is that it has felt like a real ensemble piece. You know, the two couples, and of course the maid who comes in and is a wonderful comedy act. Yeah. Is it a play that you'd always wanted to be in and to play Elyot, or is it something that you started to see anew and think there was a chance there?
Actually, I hadn't always wanted to do it, and in fact, Jonathan Kent had approached me back in, I think it was the late 90s, actually, or the early 2000s. He was working with Kate Blanchett at the time, and he thought we would make a great couple in Private Lives, and I thought he was mad. I thought Kate Blanchett isn't going to want to do this in London with me, and indeed she didn't. She was very busy doing it. At the time, I sort of rather kind of like in that thing you're going, it'll never happen, but I better read the play so that Jonathan knows that I at least know what I'm talking about. And I read the play, and I remember thinking, God, I've seen this a number of times, and I've never seen it as I've just read that play. Yeah. I've always seen it as a rather kind of, and I'm not saying ours is the only way of doing it, and of course there are many ways of doing it, but it was rather like watching Restoration comedy, where it was slightly removed, and it was very stylized, and everybody was it was very mannered, and you thought everyone was trying to do an imitation of Noel Coward, or sort of if he was a woman, you know, and I'd always been slightly left cold by it, but when I read it, I thought, God, this is it's a really lovely play because it has so many different facets to it. There are so many different sorts of drama in it, you know. And the central scene, really, to me, seemed like a very modern, naturalistic scene. The dialogue was just so great, and it was revealing private lives to me, you know, the intimacy of a relationship. And it was only later when it came up again, I remember sitting down with Jonathan Kent and going, I'd really love to play that scene as if it were a naturalistic scene. And the fact that we were doing it in that theatre gave us a forum to do that. You know, it was the perfect forum.
Because the audience is so close?
The audience is right with you, and so you don't need to push it into that proscenium thing where it suddenly does become removed from an audience. I'm not saying that that's actually always has to happen, but it seems to happen with this play. When it's behind a proscenium or arch, it suddenly has that remove, and people suddenly start talking like this, and talking, and you know, suddenly they lose you lose this thing, which is this beautifully crafted piece of dialogue, you know, and it was very satisfying when we came to do it. That it worked. My instinct about that central scene.
So did Jonathan Kent, who's the director and of course very well known to CFT audiences, did he just keep the idea bubbling in his mind that he wanted you to do it and he wanted to do it?
No, I actually reignited his desire to do it because Jonathan Church had come to me and said, look, we'd love you to do something in our 50th anniversary season. And he suggested a couple of plays that just weren't, I just thought they didn't really ring a bell for me. And he said, well, if you come up with any ideas, please let me know. And he kept on sort of filtering through emails saying, you know, any ideas,
Yes.
And it was only then where I suddenly thought, actually, Private Lives would be a really great show to do in the Minerva. And I sent him, and I talked to Jonathan Kent about it. Just said, look, would you be interested in directing? We talked about it ages ago, and you know, you've got a track record at Chichester. And he said, I would love to do it. I would absolutely love to do it. And it came from there. So it was actually me going back to him and going, how about Private Lives? Yeah.
Because obviously you've played, well, not obviously, but I assume everybody has seen the show. Is anybody brave enough to put their hands up having not seen the show? I know there are no tickets available. Could you not get a ticket, madam? I'm very sorry about that. It's not...
I could well, come on, guys, let's do it now.
Okay.
What the hell?
Right, where are they? Have they gone to the pub? It's terrible. But you've played, you know, sort of enormous roles, you know, Hamlet and Coriolanus, National, RSC, Danton, you know, Wildfeld Hall, Jane Eyre, and of course, wonderfully bad in Die Another Day, which I think is very appropriate, you know, at the moment with Skyfall just out. Yeah. But with this, you're following in the footsteps of Coward himself, Richard Burton, Alan Rickman. It's one of those plays that has attracted star-billing couples. When you were thinking about how you were going to be Elyot, well, actually, did you even think about the people that had gone before you, or did you just do your thing, that you reacted to it viscerally to the text?
Yeah, I just thought I was really looking forward to getting... It was rather like a scientist who has a hunch that, you know, if you put this with this, then you might get this. So I just couldn't wait to get into the lab and see if it worked. And the rehearsal room was the lab. And so I came to it with no sort of preconceived idea of where I wanted it to go. I just wanted to see, look, what would happen if you played these two parts like real people and
without
and
these
see
sort of
what happens. Yeah. And it's very interesting because it's not as... You know, as I say, the three acts of the play are totally different, you know. You have this first act, which is quite austere because there are these two balconies and, you know, so it sort of fizzes with comedy. But there's also this central kind of part, which is very moving, about two people who are still in love with each other. And their love for each other is sort of doomed because their chemistry is bad together. It's great, but it's also terrible. You know, and I think that's something that's familiar to a lot of people. You know, they've been wounded by that kind of thing, but they understand the sort of the draw of that. You know, and Coward writes brilliantly about that kind of love, and that was so. The first scene has this sort of central thing, but around it has all this wonderful comedy, and then the central act is rather like a kind of, I don't know. It's like it's this very intimate, modern, naturalistic play, and then the last act is like a Fado farce with people coming in and out of doors, and it's amazing. Like with great pieces of great plays like this, it's like an extraordinary mechanism, and you know that you wind the whole thing up with the first and the second act, and then you let it go for the third act, and it's just such a kind of wonderful thing to play because you really feel the audience going along with you. They want to see how this situation is going to play out, you know.
When I was watching it, because there are no tickets, and I was watching it up in the Royal Box, which is it's a rather ironic title given to a couple of seats that are above one of the entrances. and which is where the signers and the audio description people sit. And at one point, when there was a whole load of slapping going on, the woman next to me went, "Oh!" incredibly loudly. And it was exactly that sort of response, the naturalism of it, that it was utterly convincing. But one of the things that I thought was so fantastic about it was that there was this real sense of pain underneath the performances. That it was incredibly funny and it was very sexy, but actually it was really very sad. And that came through all the way. And was that something that the ensemble, developed together, or did each of you sort of do your own four corners of the compass and then put it together?
I think that with I think if you're going to have a piece of theatre, any drama, I think there needs to be. I think what you need to inject into it a certain amount of realism, so that an audience, for however long, loses that thing of them being a spectator. They're suddenly amongst it. And that's always very satisfying when you sense that, rather like you sensed it with that woman gasping, And but I think that you also need to have characters need to be balanced. So I think one of the weaknesses of certain actors is that they don't like being disliked by an audience. And I think that to play a character properly, you have to be willing to be disliked as much as you are liked. And I think these characters are as dislikable as they are likable. There are bits where you just go, "Oh, this is the most appalling," or like, "How could you do that?" Or he slaps her, and it's terrible, And at the same time, you kind of love them and you want to be with them. And at the same time, you've got these other two characters who are generally, I would say, in the few times that I've seen it, played as quite broad caricatures. The two partners that they're with, Sybil and Victor, and I sort of think it's great when they're played as people who are victims. They're victims of this couple, and it's complicated because you feel for them, or you should feel for them. It is terrible what happens to them. They're nice people, They just happen to be...
Well, are they...
dragged along by these awful solipsistic kind of, people.
They are ghastly, but at the same time, it's very interesting with Anna Louise Plowman and Anthony Calf. At the beginning, they have our sympathy, I think.
Yeah.
By the end, when they have sort
We've
of become
reduced
feral
them.
children,
Yes.
you go,
our behaviour has reduced them to these kind of, and that's what I think is great about the sort of ending, is that this couple are going to go on and create chaos elsewhere, and they've reduced these two decent people to these sort of fighting,
shrieking banshee.
It's a beautifully constructed piece.
One of the things that is always a challenge with Coward, which I think this production and you guys completely sort of pull off, is that of course he was a product of his time in many respects, an incredibly clever and witty writer. This play, 1930, at the height of his fame, and there are elements of class consciousness and an association of the time and how things are working that often take over. Did you have any discussions as a company about not quite the snobbery of some of it, but this sort of sense that Victor and Sybil are somehow slightly provincial?
Yes.
And the other, that Elyot and Amanda are somehow slightly sophisticated, the you and non-you stuff that goes on in the play.
I think that is there, that the... really, that they're metropolitan, they're sophisticated, they have a level of which isn't really their fault, and they're not sort of totally self-conscious about it, but they just do have it, and I think they're desperately trying. I think they are genuinely trying to make a fist of it with these two people at the beginning of the play, and I think it's obviously a terrible mistake, but they're trying to make a fist of it. And it's only when they really admit to themselves that it's just not going to work. As soon as they see each other, they know the game's up. I mean, that's the way we play it anyway, is that they have missed each other. They complete one another, even though they are terrible for one another.
Do you think it's sort of sex as against choosing to have an easy life? Is that the choice?
Well, it is to a certain extent. I think that is running there. You know, there is that kind of their relationship is highly passionate. You know, and I think that they've gone. That doesn't work for me. It does not work for me because it's so it makes me so unhappy and it makes me miserable. So they've gone. Well, let's choose something that's sedate and, you know, is going to be comfortable, and I'm not gonna be torn by these vicissitudes of you know, passion. But you know, the moment they see one another, it totally reignites that whole thing, and it's very prescient. I mean, I think he's you know, he really understands that. But it's not just about physical sexuality. It's about they turn each other on. They make each other laugh, which is the thing, you know, that and the thing is, in the first scene between you know, Elyot and Sybil, she doesn't get his humour. She's sort of constantly kind of going wrong-footed by it, thinking, oh God, have I upset you? She tries to make him laugh, but she gets it wrong, and it's sort of sad, but you know,
you
she's
sort of
trying.
want to go down, actually, when you're watching it. I don't know if anybody else had this. Everything that Sybil said, she's plays so wonderfully that I wanted to go down and go, you know what, it'd be much better just to be quiet now. You know, you want to sort of join in and give her some advice, woman to woman. You know, you know,
and she
you can
can't,
see she's making a fist of it one way and another. You know, but I think also the tenderness in the last scene, when they've been bickering, they've both got their suitcases, they're going to storm out, you've reduced the other two to sort of these mad people, and the moment that Amanda, Anna Chancellor, and you start to smile at each other and just start to touch each other's hands, and it is incredibly tender then. And that I found very moving. I don't know if anybody else felt that. That there's this awful thing where you know it's going to be a catastrophe and they're going to be yelling sollox at each other for the rest of time, but also you want it to work.
Yeah,
I mean,
you want
know,
them to,
yeah. And when you were rehearsing, you'd read the play, you'd read it way back, and then you came back to it and you knew it was something that you wanted to do. When you went into rehearsal with it, were there things about it, either about your character or the play in general, that surprised you, that changed from how you'd read it as a text on the page?
I was surprised at how difficult it was to... the thing is that, for me, the key to acting on stage, certainly, is to find a sense where you... find a place where you can be relaxed, because you cannot be creative, I think, on stage if you're tense, which obviously the difficulty is you get nervous when you go out on stage. So you know, you have to find a place where you're nervous but you're not tense, and you can be creative, you can be fluid, and you also need to know the dialogue so well and have deconstructed it so thoroughly, in terms of, you know, the basic questions of, you know, people ask me all the time, how do you learn your lines? Well, the thing is, you go through the text and you go, why am I saying this? Who am I saying it to? What do I think of them? What am I really trying to say? What am I saying? What is the subtext? You know, you go through all of these questions. How would I say it if it was me? How would I say that line to somebody? And you go through all of these questions, just instinctively. I mean, I didn't work to any method, but you thoroughly go through it and deconstruct it, and then you put it back together again, and then you learn it, and you learn it so well that you're not thinking about how you're going to say that line. You actually allow your instinct to take over and react and respond totally to what the other actor is doing. And, you know, that process makes it seem effortless. So an audience sitting there will go, wow, it just seems like these guys are talking, and it's effortless. It's so... and in a way that's frustrating, because then an audience thinks that you haven't really, you know, God, it must be such fun doing that. But all of the work that goes into rendering it that with such facility, you know, that's a lot of work, and I found it very difficult with this, because it's very, very neat. His writing is incredibly neat, and he speaks in a, you know, they speak in this play in a way that we no longer speak in. It's very, very, fussy, some of it, and you got extra words in a sentence, and it's rammed full of kind of things like, oh, how wonderful, or how marvellous, or how brilliant, so you're going, is it brilliant or marvellous? I can't remember in this, so you've got all of this stuff going, you have to serve the text, and you have to be very precise and neat with it. At the same time, you've got to get it so into your bones that you can forget about. It's also that thing of I was saying earlier, that sometimes it had seemed mannered to me. And I think that's because they hadn't made the language their own. It just so happens that these characters speak in this way. That's their vocabulary. It doesn't mean that they're weird people who speak in a weird way. They're normal people who use this language, and that's it's a lot of hard work, and that I found that very, very difficult and surprisingly difficult, because when I read it, I went, I think this dialogue, because there's nothing easier to learn than dialogue. What is awful to learn is great sort of swathe of speech, that you go, oh my God, and you go all the way through it, and, but when it's dialogue, it all kind of makes sense, but to be accurate with it, as Coward would want you to be.
And every word he chooses, he's chosen for a reason.
Absolutely,
it's not sloppy.
Absolutely. It's very, very neat. Yeah.
Is that, was it helpful, the fact that this is your first performance here, but many of the people involved in this production, from the director to the designer to the music designer, 3 of the 5-person ensemble have appeared here before. Is there an issue in something like Coward, where it is so bang, 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 about trust within the company and the production? Does that make a difference, that that if you get your marvellouses and brilliance back to front, somebody else will pick
up the pieces? Yeah. I mean, I think you hope that in any play that you do, because it's not just with Noel Coward that you've got problems. It's restoration or whatever. It's fiendish to learn, and it's Shakespeare, some of Shakespeare's, and you always hope that if it all falls to pieces, you've got somebody who's going to help pick you up, but I think that with this play, certainly, I mean, it really helps having. What's great, I love working with small casts,
right? Because
you really can bond tightly, and we all get on incredibly well. So and there is that trust thing of going, especially with something as intimate as this play, you want to be able to know that you can trust people, and that you're very comfortable with them.
Now, this is a slightly sort of sneaky question, and I ask this half as a novelist as much as your interviewer at this moment. This has been wonderfully well reviewed. I mean, some of the reviews have been, I think Charles Spencer said if there were such a thing as a 6-star review, he would give it, which is amazing, particularly from him. But as an actor, do you read your reviews because it might influence your performance, or do you hear about them? How important are they to how you continue to go on performance after performance?
I really don't read them, and it wasn't something that it wasn't a discipline that I've always followed. When I first started, I read them religiously, and I had good reviews, I had bad reviews, I had mediocre reviews, and all of them, no matter how good they were or how bad they were, none of them ever satisfied me. Good ones were never good enough, and bad ones just were like the earth had just,
And you can quote those, I bet.
Oh,
the
word
bad
for
sentences.
word. I remember the last one. The last one I ever read, actually, was, oh God, this was funny, actually, when I look back on it. And it was when I was doing Hamlet in London, and I'd stopped reading them, and I'd been very good about it. And I got on the tube, and there was a copy of The Big Issue. And I picked it up,
no.
and I was rustling through it, and there was a picture of me, and I went, oh God. And I went, oh, come on, what harm can it do? I bet they loved it anyway. And I read this thing, and it was eviscerating about me. It's like, Toby Stephens shows off throughout the whole thing, barking his speeches, all of this stuff. It was absolutely horrible. And I just went, that is it. I am through. I am really through with this thing. Because, I mean, it doesn't matter what it's in. It doesn't matter where it is. you read it and it really has a profound effect on you, and it's sort of irrational in a way. I mean, and I mean, the thing is, look, I don't read them anymore, but you can glean from people's reactions about, there's sort of like, you're in productions where people just sort of, in the moment you come along down a corridor, they go, sort of like, they mutter, hello, and then there are other ones where everyone's like, hello, and listen, you've got to really appreciate the times where it's something that people have responded to, and you just got to really enjoy those times, and because it's not always like that, and that's kind of why I love doing this, because each production that I'm involved in, every play is like an organism, and it has a life of its own, and when it goes well, it's very, very enjoyable, and I'm thrilled that people are enjoying this.
Yes, because it's given a wonderful atmosphere to the end of the season. Which, because the season goes on, the clocks are going back tomorrow. So there's this sense of, oh my God, we've had the whole summer and it's now coming to an end. Last question from me, and then I'll take a couple from the audience, because I promised I would let Toby go home very quickly, because he has been working extremely hard, and the show is about to close. You do theatre, you do television, you do film. Cheesy question. What are you going to do next, and what would you like to do next?
Well, I'm actually the thing I'm doing next is I'm doing a TV. It's an American TV thing, but it's a big flagship show for a network called Stars, and they're doing, it's a big pirate extravaganza in South Africa, and it's like a prequel to Treasure Island. So I'm actually playing Captain Flint, who is Captain Flint's treasure on Treasure Island. So, and it's a really fun script, and I actually to say, listen, I mean, this is a dream job. I mean, it's a great job.
Sounds
I mean,
fantastic.
it's filming in South Africa for 5 months in Cape Town, and it'll be a lot of fun. And it's tricky because also one is away from one's family, and so obviously you have to kind of make that work as much as you can, but it's it'll be a lot of fun. But that sort of thing really facilitates me being able to do this sort of thing. Because this is, I love doing plays, and I love doing theatre. I love filming as well, but it's great being able to do this kind of stuff. So.
And the difficult question for you in a way is that it's hard asking actresses, because actually there aren't necessarily the same big roles. You've played an awful lot of the big roles. If I say to you, what is the one role you'd like to play? Well, you've played Hamlet, you've played Coriolanus, you've got a lot of those under you. But is there something, either a play that has not yet been written that you would like for yourself, or a role that you just think one day that is the role that I'm going to make absolutely mine?
It's odd because I don't have any specific it's odd because I really do not operate in. I think in a way the parts that you kind of go, oh, I'd really love to play that, are the parts that you really shouldn't play, because you somehow it was very interesting. I remember reading it was a film director who said the films that directors harbour, and they go, I've got to make this, and they struggle for years until they finally get the budget together. And like a lot of really well-known directors have done this, and they finally make this thing, and it's normally a disaster.
Because it's got no heart?
I don't know. It's just because they've somehow set themselves. It's this thing where you obsess about something and you invest it with so much that actually somehow that diffuses it. I don't know what it is, and so in a way I like being. I mean, I'm quite pathetic in a way in that I like being asked to do things, but I'm getting to a point where now I kind of go, well, if I don't actually start doing stuff myself, I won't get a chance to do it. Yeah. So, but I do like people coming to me with saying, what about this? I have a slightly perverse sense where I quite like playing things that I perhaps not, that are uncomfortable parts.
Right.
I like uncomfortable people that are anti-heroes. I quite like that.
You were a very good villain. I'm quite keen.
I mean,
on it.
but it's interesting. Like, I always, even if you are playing a villain, particularly in drama, in plays, it's for me. I always try and find the empathy where an audience can understand that.
Because that's where the drama is.
That's where the drama is, and they actually kind of, the Richard III is a perfect one. Not that I want to play Richard III, but Richard III is a wonderful one because he ingratiates himself in the audience, and the audience actually like him. And again, it goes back to that thing that I was saying. They like him and they hate him, But there should be an element. I remember when playing Coriolanus, because that's normally a play where at the end of it people go, oh, thank God he's dead. He's banging on all the time, And I remember when I played him, that it slightly broke the mold because I was about 25 when I originally played him, and he was normally played with a man in his 50s who's a sort of complete man who's sort of, he's not going to change, and therefore it is no tragedy when he dies. Whereas I played him as a young man who had just been indoctrinated into a certain, by his class, by his group, by Rome. He'd been created into this creature that was this extraordinary athlete and soldier, but also, he was incredibly intelligent, but he was also a reactionary. He was like a kind of fascist. But there was a sense at the end, if only he was beginning to change. He begins to change, and at the moment he begins to change, he dies. So there's an element of, oh God, but if only he could have, in like 10 years' time, maybe he could have been somebody who would have been great,
Yeah, and because he had been in the dark place, he would have actually
exactly. And an
possibly
audience, despite kind of going, God, you're a reactionary, they kind of go, yeah, but I kind of get what you're talking. I kind of empathise with some of your ideas, and I also understand why you're like that, And that to me is where that's where it bites with an audience. That.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, couple of questions. Gentleman there, lady there.
I'm not sure whether I should ask this, but it's always intrigued me. Your performance with your fellow actor is absolutely electrifying in the second act. Now, how on earth do you prepare, in particular with somebody like Anna Chancellor, for that sort of acting, which, for the rest of us, is likely to be highly arousing?
Well,
Right, simulated.
well, I mean, that's where I say that kind of trust thing between two actors kind of comes in, where you kind of go, look, we have to go to these places, and it's interesting because it is something that I don't know, maybe there's something lacking in me, but I have no qualms about that in a rehearsal room because I know it's safe. I know I am. It is a job, and it is something that I take great pride in doing. That I play a character who, and it's that finding those places where an audience go, wow, this is like really real, and I don't know whether I should be here. Those are the parts that I find most satisfying. I mean, it sounds quite perverse of me to do that, but then I think that I'm doing my job, because an audience loses its objectivity, and it suddenly becomes part subjective. It's part of that, and they're relating to it. They are part of the drama, and that's a great. Actors talk about receiving an energy from an audience. That's when you receive that energy, when they've allowed themselves to sort of step onto that stage with you. And so we're all partaking in this.
Slightly dodgy 50 Shades moment. It's lovely, yes. Excellent. Lady there. No, I'm just going to take this lady and then we'll have to stop, I'm afraid.
Mine was a similar question. How does the audience reaction on each performance affect your performance? Do you feel a slight difference every time you perform in the way people laugh, or are quiet or a, slightly shuffling order?
Yeah, I mean, it is, and that's part of the skill of, of what you have to shift, especially with the comedy. It's because it is a slightly technical thing in that you have to allow for an audience to laugh, but yet sustain this tension where, so you can't let the rope dip, so you have to maintain these gaps, but then pick it up, and and that's quite a technical thing.
May I just add, there's a tremendous physicality at the end of the play, and again, has that changed during this run? Have you had
Actually,
She means, you're getting on a bit,
Actually, I have to say,
How are your
actually,
knees
Jonathan Kent, it was so funny, in rehearsals, Jonathan Kent would go, because there were during the fight, which we both, I always think fights are very important in drama. I think they're there for a reason. They are there to make an audience excited, and therefore you go, right, let's try and get this so that it's real enough that they are, excited by it. But as a consequence, we would go through the rehearsals for the fight, and Jonathan Kent used to find more and more lethal things for Anna Chancellor going, no, I think you should throw the books at him, and then, and like the metal thing, that'll be all right, as long as you miss him, I was going, well, look, this is taking a lot for granted, Jonathan, I mean, And there were various times where we were running it or something where things had gone wrong and injuries had taken place. But that's, and Anna would be mortified because really she's the one who's sort of doing most of the throwing and things. and she would be like really upset. She'd go, oh, I've heard you. And I'd be like, look, that's the deal we make. We make that pact when we say we're going to get involved in one of these things. It's what can happen. It's just you've got to constantly remind, performers have to remind, I always say, if anything goes wrong, just make sure we have eye contact. Just make that eye contact where because it's very easy to get, you get carried along by the momentum, the velocity of the play and of what you're playing, and that those lines between what's real and what's unreal can become slightly blurred for actors, and you have to constantly remind yourself, no, this is we're playing here. We're not, it's not real.
Yeah. On that, I'm sorry. I know I said I'd let you have one, and I'm sorry to the lady there, but the house managers are here, and they all should go home, and Toby should go home. So I'm really sorry. Forgive me for that. I'm just going to do a couple of parish notices before we finish, because this is the last event. I know Rupert is going to say something in a moment. It's been an incredible treat that you've come and you've been so energetic and enthusiastic. And after doing all the shows that you've done, and you've just got a couple more to go, but it has finished off the season so amazingly well. Tomorrow, if any of you are still, starting to feel withdrawal symptoms from CFT, the Youth Theatre is doing something called Pass It On. That's at 11 o'clock, and I think it's a piece that's been written by a former Youth Theatre member, is that right? And that's in the Minerva, which would obviously be great, but you'll need to get tickets from the box office. On the 30th of October, there is something called Gold Run, which is an extraordinary collaboration between Carousel, Glyndebourne and Pallant House Gallery, and it's learning disabled and disabled actors working together. And that is a really wonderful thing to support if you've got the time and you can come along. And then, of course, apart from anything else, in London, there are still many CFT shows playing, if you've not yet seen them. And of course, there's Singing in the Rain, there's Sweeney Todd, Kiss Me Kate opens at the Old Vic on the 20th of November, and actually, previews then, and from the 27th of November, the run opens. And there is, and I have to say this as the last thing, of course, on the 29th and 30th of November, a book sale in the assembly rooms, and all of those proceeds will go to the Renew campaign, as will everything else. You've all been incredibly supportive of CFT. They have done incredibly by raising £20 million towards the Renew project, which will make this theatre a theatre fit for the 21st century and fit for all the amazing actors who have appeared here over the years. But bizarrely, the last 2 million will be the hardest to raise. So every little bit that you can all do so that when they open in 2014, it is beautiful, will be there. The season for 2013, which will be in the Minerva, and a big tent, I'm reliably told, halfway up the park, will go on sale in February. And before I hand over to Rupert, is my friend with all the badges there? Do you mind standing up? This lady has been to every event and has a badge for every single event. Ladies and gentlemen, the very wonderful and the very brilliant Toby Stephens.